Have you ever wondered why the greatest construction blunder in human history is guarded by the state as if it were a top-secret strategic military facility? Every year, millions of tourists from around the world flock to a small Italian square to take a fun photo where they pretend to hold up the leaning building with their hands. They laugh, buy souvenirs, and leave, remaining completely blind to what is truly rising right before their eyes. School textbooks, encyclopedias, and official guides eagerly tell us a touching but utterly absurd fairy tale about medieval architects who simply miscalculated the soil. We're told they overlooked the softness of the ground, made a critical blunder, and accidentally created one of the world's architectural wonders, which defies all laws of gravity and continues to stand for centuries. But let's cast aside this tourist mythology and apply cold engineering logic, strict laws of physics, rules of materials resistance, and plain common sense to this tale. The official version is an open mockery of human intelligence. We're asked to believe that masters capable of erecting majestic cathedrals with perfect geometry and intricate vaults suddenly forgot to check the swamp right under their feet. The truth is that the Leaning Tower of Pisa was never a mistake. It is a high-tech mechanism, a geodetic instrument, and an engineering structure of colossal complexity, the true purpose of which modern academic institutions are only now beginning to realize with horror. Let's turn to the dry figures and physical facts that shatter the official paradigm from the very first seconds of analysis. We'll start with the basic parameters of the structure. The mass of this bell tower amounts to an astonishing 16,000 tons. Imagine the colossal weight of a heavy modern ocean cruiser compressed into a relatively narrow vertical stone cylinder. Now, ask any design engineer, statics specialist, or soil mechanics expert, how deep must the foundation be for a vertically oriented, super heavy building that is moreover constructed on notoriously soft, water-saturated, swampy soil? 33 feet? 65 feet? Or perhaps it should be a complex system of deep concrete or steel piles extending through the silt to solid bedrock. Official architectural plans and historical documents state that the foundation of the Leaning Tower of Pisa extends into the ground by just 10 feet. Just 10 feet of depth to support 14,500 tons of dense white marble and limestone. This is not merely a statistical anomaly or a fun fact from a guidebook. According to all known laws of physics, rules of static pressure distribution, and fundamentals of structural mechanics, this structure should have toppled over, collapsed, and shattered into pieces before the builders even finished erecting the third level. Taking into account the lever effect created by the Leaning Tower and adding wind load, the 10-foot foundation would have been ripped out of the ground like a nail from rotten wood. A 10-foot foundation for a skyscraper of that era, standing literally on a wet sponge, is equivalent to trying to balance a heavy bowling ball on the tip of a pencil stuck into wet sand. Nevertheless, the building stands. It is severely tilted, but it does not fall, despite the centuries that have passed since its appearance. Historians in their offices shrug their shoulders and call it divine providence or a fortunate coincidence. But professional engineers know full well that there are no miracles in materials resistance or theoretical mechanics. In these exact sciences, there are only unaccounted variables and hidden balance factors. Think for a second. What if these officially stated 10 feet are not a classic foundation at all? What if what generations of tourists and armchair scholars consider the building's base is actually just a visible cap? A perfectly fitted plug for a gigantic complex. If we analyze the distribution of the building's mass and the actual vector of its center of gravity using modern computer programs, we inevitably arrive at a paradoxical, but the only physically justified, conclusion. The visible part of the tower, with its elegant arched galleries and marble columns, is merely the tip of the iceberg, a kind of interface. Beneath this 10-foot stone cap lies something entirely different. There is a colossal shock-absorbing matrix, a hidden underground hub made from materials unknown to us today, with incredible density and elasticity, extending deep into the earth by dozens and possibly hundreds of feet. A logical and chilling question arises. Why would anyone need to hide such a gigantic underground infrastructure under the guise of a leaning medieval bell tower? Why expend unimaginable resources to mathematically flawlessly calculate and implement a structure simulating inevitable collapse? The answer lies in the angle of this famous lean itself. Official history desperately wants us to believe that the building began to settle randomly, due to workers' incompetence and loose soil. But what if this lean is not a flaw at all, but an ultra-precise calibration of a hidden mechanism? What if all these 14,500 tons of stone were originally, from the very first day of the project, designed at a strict and precise angle to turn the structure into a gigantic plumb line, pointing exactly at a specific target deep beneath the tectonic plates? To grasp the scale of this global engineering design, we will have to tear away the curtain from the so-called building construction process. We have been conditioned to believe that a small commune erected this object over a full 200 years. But as soon as we closely examine the demographic data of that time and the logic of labor-resource distribution, the official historical picture begins to crack at the seams and crumble to dust, revealing the shocking truth about what people were actually doing on this square over 2 centuries. Let's open the dry historical archives and look at the demographic situation of that time to finally dispel the myth of heroic medieval architects. Official science claims that the bell tower was built over a full 200 years. 200 years of incredible effort in an era when the average lifespan of an ordinary person barely exceeded 30 years. The population of Pisa at that time numbered only a few tens of thousands of people. These people constantly suffered from devastating epidemics, waged endless, grueling wars with neighboring powerful city-states, and endured the harshest shortages of basic resources, building materials, and food. And historians seriously propose that we believe this tiny city, over the lifetimes of many generations, maniacally persisted in pouring astronomical funds into a knowingly hazardous building? Any sane ruler, experienced treasurer, or chief architect would immediately order the leaning structure dismantled at the earliest stages. That would have been the only correct decision: to quickly dismantle the catastrophic mistake and use the most valuable, perfectly processed white marble to erect a straight, reliable cathedral, or strengthen the city's defensive walls. Why spend 2 centuries of colossal labor on a bell tower that threatened to collapse at any moment and crush hundreds of townspeople? The answer is logically chilling, but it completely shatters the cozy worldview of armchair professors. They did not demolish this falling building for one simple and obvious reason. They did not build it. They were not its original creators at all. Throughout these claimed 200 years, the medieval inhabitants were engaged in something entirely different, far more complex and dangerous. They methodically, layer by layer, excavated a colossal artifact of a previous, unimaginably more advanced civilization, desperately trying to understand its design and restore at least the visible upper levels for their primitive needs. Those lengthy historical pauses in the so-called construction, which textbooks frivolously attribute to local conflicts or a simple lack of funds in the treasury, were actually long periods of deep technological impasse. Workers constantly encountered monolithic elements of the hidden structure, the operating principles of which their medieval minds simply could not comprehend. They were excavating a highly complex engineering hub, clearing it of centuries of dense soil deposits and trying to disguise it as familiar architecture by crudely adding decorative galleries on top. This is precisely why the tower's architectural style so starkly deviates from the overall strict engineering context of the era, and many elements of the stone decoration seem glued on, absolutely artificially. Local masters were merely trying to superficially adapt the discovered high-tech geodetic marker for the utilitarian functions of a mundane church bell tower. But in the excavation process, they encountered a fundamental problem that was physically impossible to solve using medieval winches and primitive plumb lines. The enormous tower was crooked from the very beginning. And here we come right up to one of the most astonishing and suppressed engineering paradoxes, which academic science cowardly tries to hide behind the absurd tale of naive tilt compensation. If you examine the geometry of this building with utmost attention, or study its precise laser three-dimensional scans, you will notice a shocking detail. The tower is not just leaning to one side, it has a distinctly pronounced shape of a curved banana. School textbooks offer us an openly absurd explanation. Supposedly, the builders, suddenly noticing that the massive building was settling into the soft ground, decided to outsmart it and began making heavy stone columns and massive floors on one side slightly longer to visually level the upper part to the horizon. It sounds like amusing peasant ingenuity, but only until you start applying the strict laws of materials resistance to this children's fairy tale. Try for a second to imagine this process from the point of view of real structural mechanics. Try to unevenly load a solid stone cylinder weighing 14,500 tons, which is already in a state of extremely unstable equilibrium on wet, swampy ground. The laws of physics are inexorable, and it is absolutely impossible to deceive them with a simple trowel and chisel. The attempt to artificially curve such a colossal, incredibly heavy mass during prolonged construction would inevitably lead to the emergence of critical internal stresses in the material structure itself. The massive stone blocks would begin to crack uncontrollably, the binding joints would instantly separate, and the entire gigantic structure would collapse with a deafening crash under the crushing impact of uneven center of gravity distribution. Solid marble does not possess the plasticity of raw wood or the flexibility of metal to forgive such barbaric violations of static laws. The only possible explanation, from the point of view of pure physics and higher mathematics, is that this perfect curvature was embedded in the design from the very beginning. The tower was designed curved long before the first stone of its visible base was laid. This curvature is not a pathetic attempt to correct a fatal mistake by uneducated masons. It is a brilliant, mathematically flawless calibration of the center of mass, requiring incredible computational power. Every radian of this bend is calculated with frightening precision. The curvature of the form transforms this gigantic structure into the likeness of a perfect pendulum, where every pound of weight is distributed in space to keep the gravity vector strictly within the allowable deviation radius, preventing overturning. Unknown engineers of the past, possessing knowledge of mechanics and spatial geometry at an incredible level, calculated this most complex bend to the millimeter. They created a colossal stone plumb line that defies time itself. And now ask yourself the main question. What exactly should this multi-ton mathematical indicator point to unerringly? The precisely calibrated angle of lean and curvature of the tower direct the colossal pressure vector not just into a random layer of earth, but to a strictly defined point deep beneath it. This vector strikes straight into the core of that very hidden shock-absorbing matrix, serving as a guiding beam. Such filigree precision is vitally necessary to ensure uninterrupted interaction of the heavy structure with the surrounding unstable geological environment. And it is precisely this hidden interaction that holds the key to how this building managed to survive what was guaranteed to grind it to dust multiple times over, bringing us right up to the terrifying phenomenon that modern science was forced to officially acknowledge quite recently. If you are still clinging to the salvific thought that the tower's curved shape could be in any way linked to the clumsy actions of medieval masons, then it is time to subject this fragile illusion to the most merciless and destructive test of all possible. It is time to talk about the inexorable fury of the planet itself, about tectonic shifts, and about how the official historical paradigm shatters with a crack against the harsh realities of seismology. The Italian peninsula has always been and remains a zone of heightened tectonic activity. The earth here breathes, moves, and periodically convulses with terrifying force, wiping entire settlements off the face of the earth. According to strictly documented historical chronicles and modern geological data, during its existence, the Leaning Tower of Pisa has been subjected to at least 4 of the most powerful earthquakes. Think about this fact from the point of view of pure physics and logic. We have a colossal stone structure weighing 14,500 tons, which is already holding on by a thread, balancing at a critical angle on the so-called swampy ground. Any construction university student who has studied even the basic course in materials resistance and fracture mechanics will tell you with 100% certainty, at the first serious tectonic jolt, this leaning building should have folded like a house of cards. The seismic wave would inevitably have entered into resonance with the tilted structure, amplifying the amplitude of its swaying and tearing the stone bonds to shreds, burying the entire square under the debris. Around the tower, over the centuries, straight, sturdy, reliably designed buildings collapsed, whose foundations extended deep into solid rock. But this falling anomaly endured 4 destructive cataclysms without a single critical crack in its load-bearing frame. It withstood as if it were absolutely invulnerable to the wrath of the Earth's depths. This glaring anomaly gave no peace to the world scientific community for decades, until finally, in 2018, an international group of leading engineers and soil mechanics specialists decided to conduct a large-scale study. They armed themselves with the most advanced laser scanners, the most complex modeling algorithms, and the most powerful computing complexes to unravel this architectural mystery. And what they discovered should have turned our understanding of history upside down if these data had not been so quickly and technically smoothed over in official press releases. The scientists officially confirmed that the tower owes its salvation to a highly complex physical phenomenon that in academic circles has been named the dynamic soil structure interaction effect. The essence of this phenomenon lies in an incredibly subtle, mathematically perfect balance between 3 key parameters: the colossal height and rigidity of the tower itself, the specific frequency of seismic vibrations in this particular region, and the extreme softness of the soil at its base. When the earth begins to shake, the soft soil absorbs part of the energy, but most importantly, the rigidity and height of the building alter its own resonant frequency in such a way that it never coincides with the earthquake frequency. As a result, the tower simply does not enter into destructive seismic resonance. It glides along the waves of the tectonic impact, damping the destructive energy within its perfectly balanced center of mass. The academic researchers, constrained by the rigid framework of approved history, were forced to make a completely ridiculous conclusion. In their reports, they stated that this flawless seismic damper, operating with the precision of Swiss watches, formed completely by accident. We are asked to believe that illiterate medieval architects, having no slightest idea about wave dynamics, frequency resonance, and nonlinear soil mechanics, simply threw stones into random mud and somehow magically hit the jackpot in the form of the dynamic soil structure interaction effect. The probability of such a random coincidence in engineering is absolute zero. To artificially model a similar protection system for a modern skyscraper requires weeks of work by entire departments of specialists using supercomputers to calculate every load vector. If we discard the theory of incredible coincidences, then an entirely different, chillingly logical picture emerges before us. The soft soil on which the tower stands is not a natural, foul-smelling swamp, as they try to drill into our heads. It is an artificially created, specially calculated, and laid damping cushion. Ancient builders, whose knowledge far surpassed the capabilities of our modern science, deliberately dug a pit and filled it with a multi-component mixture of soft soils to create a perfect shock absorber. They did not make a mistake in choosing the location. They created this location. And they designed the tower itself to precisely this height, precisely this mass, and precisely this degree of rigidity, so that, in tandem with this artificial soft cushion, it would forever protect what lies beneath it. This entire leaning, snow-white structure is nothing other than a gigantic, high-tech tectonic safety device, a colossal seismic damper designed to absorb and dissipate earthquake energy. Its task is to take the blows of the elements upon itself and dampen them, preventing destructive vibrations from penetrating deeper into the earth. And here we return once again to those very mysterious 10 feet of visible foundation from the first part of our investigation. 10 feet is merely the contact zone, the pressure transmission interface between the massive stone safety device and the artificially liquefied soil, beneath which lies the real, rigid capsule of that very unknown underground hub. The engineering genius of this solution boggles the imagination. Instead of fighting the earthquake with rigid underground piles that would eventually break under the onslaught of tectonic plates, the creators took the path of judo. They used softness to absorb the force. But why was such an unprecedented, paranoid level of protection needed? Why wasn't it enough to simply hide the mechanism deep underground? The answer lies in the fact that this hidden underground infrastructure hub is not a dead artifact. It is still functioning. It requires stability for its operation, and it needs constant maintenance of connection with the surface. The damper not only protects it from external impacts, but also serves as a tool for fine-tuning internal processes. And to finally confirm that what we have before us is not just a passive protective dome, but an active, operating feedback mechanism, we need to lift our gaze to the very top of this geometric anomaly. There, among the arch openings exposed to the winds, hang 7 gigantic metal objects that official history naively calls ordinary church bells, without even suspecting their true, hidden physical purpose in this grand engineering chain. Let's turn our close attention to the very top, crowning part of this grandiose stone mechanism, which crowns this unimaginably complex engineering structure. There, at a dizzying height, exposed to all winds, aggressive atmospheric impact, and relentless time, are located 7 colossal metal objects that official historical references, encyclopedias, and tourist brochures disdainfully and exceedingly naively call ordinary church bells. We are eagerly told touching and romantic stories about how local craftsmen cast them over long decades solely to summon pious townspeople to regular Sunday masses and religious holidays. But if we forever cast aside this sentimental historical lyricism and look at these massive bronze spheres solely through the prism of strict acoustic physics, complex wave mechanics, and advanced materials science, a picture so astonishing will open before us that it will make any modern specialist in sound technologies shudder in reverent horror. These 7 gigantic metal structures are absolutely not a primitive means of sound alerting or a classical musical instrument in our usual understanding of the word. They represent a most complex, mathematically precise acoustic gun, every tiniest element of which was designed with frightening, almost inhuman precision to perform one single, critically important engineering task. Let's start with the fundamental fact that each of these 7 massive objects is tuned to its own, absolutely unique and mathematically flawless note. And this is by no means just some random, chaotic set of sounds, intuitively selected to be pleasant to the unsophisticated human ear. This is a strict, mathematically deterministic physical sequence of frequencies that, when sounded simultaneously or in a precisely calculated sequence, creates the most complex spatial pattern of the most powerful acoustic interference. The vibrations continuously generated by these multi-ton pieces of perfectly cast metal generate colossal energy sound waves in a strictly defined and narrowly directed low-frequency spectrum. Modern acoustic engineers and solid mechanics specialists know full well that it is precisely low frequencies that possess the unique physical ability to penetrate unimpeded through the densest and most viscous physical barriers with absolutely minimal loss of their original kinetic energy. But the main and most shocking secret of this grandiose sound installation lies not in the fact of its technical existence itself, but in the ingenious way it is inseparably integrated into the overall spatial geometry of the entire leaning building. Recall that very famous lean of the stone tower and its mathematically precise curved banana shape, which we discussed in such detail and argumentatively earlier. If this super-heavy bell tower stood perfectly straight, as all classical canons of boring medieval architecture would undoubtedly require, the sound waves from these gigantic bells would spread absolutely evenly in all directions along the horizon line, uselessly dissipating in the open atmosphere and instantly losing their penetrating kinetic force. But the artificially set angle of lean by the creators radically and forever changes the entire basic physics of this wave process. At the current, strictly fixed in space angle of lean of the grandiose structure, all this colossal sound energy is no longer transmitted into the empty infinity of the heavens. The entire leaning tower begins to work as a gigantic, narrowly directed stone waveguide, as a colossal horn that greedily collects sound oscillations from the 7 metal sources and mercilessly focuses them into a single, incredibly dense acoustic beam. And this concentrated sound beam, unquestioningly obeying the strict laws of spatial geometry and the principles of sound reflection from the curved inner walls of the marble cylinder, strikes not at the horizon line, but is directed exactly downward, at a mathematically perfect angle of entry into the Earth's surface. The vector of this unprecedented acoustic attack was calculated by ancient engineers to thousandths of a degree. The sound waves rush straight into that very artificially created and carefully balanced soft soil cushion, which forms a dense ring around the hidden 10-foot stone foundation plug. When the multi-ton metal masses begin to swing, they unleash upon the earth an invisible but crushing waterfall of focused, low-frequency vibration. And it is precisely here, at this point of contact, that what in modern theoretical physics is called the process of forced resonance of a dense medium occurs. The soft soil, which, as we have already irrefutably established, is a high-tech geological shock absorber, obediently accepts this focused sound strike and begins to vibrate synchronously at the same given frequency. It acts as a gigantic transmitting membrane, relaying the acoustic signal further into the impenetrable, unreachable depth, to where no inquisitive human gaze, and no most modern surface georadar can penetrate. What exactly was this incredible, ahead-of-its-time directed acoustic resonance system designed and erected for? The answer to this question lies in the realm of such advanced technologies that modern academic science is only just beginning, extremely timidly and uncertainly, to master in its most closed and classified military laboratories. Before us rises nothing other than a colossal, ancient geodetic sonar and wireless remote energy impact system, geniusly fused into one. This dense acoustic beam pierces straight through the moist layers of soft soil and reaches the hidden, deep underground, super-strong shock-absorbing matrix and the global infrastructure hub sealed within it, with absolute, unerring precision. Think for just a moment about the fact that any complex mechanical or electronic system, especially one forced to operate in the extreme conditions of a deep underground, catastrophically needs regular calibration, status diagnostics, and quite likely even wireless energy recharge to sustain its basic operational functions over long millennia. A sound wave of the required frequency, penetrating through the Earth's thickness at the only correct angle, is capable of inducing controlled microvibrations in the crystal lattices of unknown super-strong alloys to us, contactlessly cleaning working surfaces from inevitable multi-century geological deposits, activating hidden piezoelectric elements for current generation, and serving as a kind of diagnostic signal, continuously checking the structural integrity of the entire vast underground system. This is a constant, invisible to those around dialogue between the visible stone retranslator on the surface and the invisible dormant core deep below. And it is precisely in this terrifying technological context that the entire official historical paradigm, with its uneducated medieval builders, takes on a completely eerie, absurd, and deeply tragicomic hue. Just imagine this surreal picture. Generation after generation of simple, illiterate people, sincerely and naively believing that they were selflessly ringing the bells solely for the glory of heaven, day after day eagerly pulled on thick hemp ropes, thereby unwittingly activating a hidden mechanism of truly monstrous technological complexity. They were merely blind, unsuspecting operators, living biological appendages of this gigantic acoustic machine, having no slightest idea that every strike of the bell sends the most powerful diagnostic impulse straight into the dark bowels of the planet. They definitely did not build this incredible tower from scratch. They merely, in the process of excavation, accidentally found a way to extract sound from it, intuitively or by some long-forgotten hint, activating the basic maintenance protocol of the ancient installation. All the two-century bustle with the so-called construction of the bell tower, with timid and clumsy attempts to complete the upper marble galleries, was merely an unconscious camouflage, a long process of gradual excavation and accidental activation of this geodetic and acoustic instrument, left by those who perfectly understood the true nature of vibrations and nonlinear wave mechanics. Now that we have sequentially and mercilessly assembled all the disparate fragments of this astonishing engineering puzzle into one, a completely new, chillingly cohesive and logical picture emerges before us. We have a colossal mass of 14,500 tons, which rests in a way utterly inexplicable from the standpoint of modern physics on an artificial 10-foot plug. We have a perfectly calculated curvature of form, transforming the cumbersome building into an ultra-precise gravitational plumb line. We have artificially liquefied, meticulously selected soil, creating the salvific dynamic soil structure interaction effect for absolute protection from any possible tectonic catastrophes. And finally, we have the most powerful acoustic gun from 7 focused emitters, which continuously riddles this soft soil with resonant, low-frequency waves. This is not the mistake of stupid architects. This is categorically not a fortunate accident. This is a perfect, closed, self-sufficient, and fully autonomous system. A genius protective mechanism operating without a single critical failure over a colossal span of time. But if this curved tower is merely an interface, merely an external control panel and seismic protective dome, then we are obliged to take the next step and pose the most terrifying, most destructive question, which will inevitably and finally bury all modern naive notions about our distant past. What exactly is hidden there, in the unreachable depth, at the very end of this acoustic and gravitational beam? And to what global network is this stone giant actually connected? Now that the veil of millennial historical lies has been finally torn away, and you, through the prism of strict, uncompromising cold science, see with your own eyes not a cute-leaning tourist attraction, but a grandiose, mathematically precise engineering installation, it is time to take the most important, most frightening step in our investigation. You are no longer part of that faceless, controlled crowd of ordinary blind visitors with cameras who obediently consume pre-prepared informational chewing gum. Now you belong to an exclusively narrow circle of people capable of realizing the true, planetary scale of what is happening. Now you crystal clearly understand that the pressure vector of this colossal tower, its unique geodetic lean, and the penetrating acoustic beam are directed not into the random void of tectonic plates. They point to a specific, artificially created and carefully hidden target. What lies at a depth of many dozens and hundreds of feet beneath the specially liquefied, damping soil of the Italian square is neither a forgotten tomb of ancient rulers, nor a secret storehouse of plundered gold, nor a deep well for banal artesian water extraction. There, beyond the reach of any modern drilling rigs and the latest surface seismic scanners, is located a colossal, fully autonomous infrastructure hub. This is not just an isolated protective bunker. It is a gigantic machine hall of planetary scale, created from materials whose incredible strength and flawless molecular structure surpass all known laws of modern materials science. This hidden deep matrix is designed for continuous control, stabilization, and distribution of colossal tectonic stresses within the Earth's crust. Imagine a gigantic underground station, a geoengineering complex of unimaginable size, designed solely to tame the most brutal geological nature of our planet. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is merely a modest architectural interface, a tiny diagnostic probe, and a protective cap protruding on the surface. It works as a most complex valve for releasing physical pressure and an acoustic modulator for this bottomless working station. And it is precisely here that we approach the turning point, when the official academic history finally crumbles to dust, leaving behind absolutely nothing but shameful, pitiful attempts to hide the grand truth. Who could have designed and brought to life a project of such transcendent technical complexity? It is perfectly clear that these were not those illiterate peasants and naive craftsmen who fiddled in the mud for 200 years of the Middle Ages, desperately trying to attach marble columns to a mechanism utterly incomprehensible to them. The builders of this gigantic underground hub and the tower interface itself possessed such phenomenal knowledge that it makes our modern engineers feel like little children playing in a sandbox. This was a civilization of true creators of planetary architecture, a society of the highest technological level, whose existence official historical science categorically refuses to acknowledge. A single proof of their reality would forever destroy all existing academic degrees, rewrite all encyclopedias, and completely collapse the established system of control over the human mind. They categorically did not build from wooden beams and raw brick. They thought in terms of continental materials resistance. They filigreedly controlled the resonant frequencies of tectonic faults, and they used the planet itself as a source of inexhaustible kinetic energy. To create this underground masterpiece of thermodynamics, hydrodynamics, and seismology, these true engineers of the past had to extract millions of tons of solid rock from the depths, create perfectly level, mathematically flawless technological voids at unimaginable depths, and reliably hermetically seal them using alloys that completely ignore the destructive impact of molten magma and colossal physical pressure. The entire official history of the city of Pisa, as well as the history of many other ancient megacities, represents a classic textbook example of large-scale historical cargo cult. Imagine a tribe of natives who accidentally found a modern nuclear reactor abandoned in the jungle and began sincerely worshipping its blinking control panels, naively trying to decorate it with palm fronds and bright flowers. Exactly in the same way, medieval rulers and their obedient workers, stumbling upon protruding fragments of an ancient geodetic installation during the process of digging the earth, tried to turn it into a mundane church bell tower. They painstakingly and slowly excavated the surviving technical elements, scraped off the multi-century dense dirt, marveled at the perfect smoothness of the unknown base material, and, being utterly incapable of understanding its true technical purpose, began crudely cladding it with their own white stone. This is precisely why historical documents of that time record such a ludicrous, absurdly protracted 200-year construction. They were not building, they were trying to tame and aesthetically decorate an ancient artifact, the operating principle of which was infinitely distant from their understanding. And every time they made another fatal mistake in their primitive excavations, the perfect balance of the system was disrupted, forcing them to wait decades for the Earth to return to relative physical equilibrium. Do you now feel this scorching cold of terrifying realization? The realization of that incredible fact that our entire modern civilization literally walks on the lids of colossal mechanisms, naively and arrogantly considering them its own architectural achievements. Official historical science has turned into a gigantic, unwieldy informational screen, a tool of global truth concealment. We are deliberately fed a primitive, linear image of our past so that we never ask the right, inconvenient questions about those technologies lying right under our feet. Why should modern European governmental structures, as well as the entire world conservative academic community, openly admit that the most profitable tourist attraction is part of someone else's terrifyingly powerful engineering infrastructure? It is far simpler, safer, and financially more advantageous to continue selling cheap souvenirs to gullible tourists and telling amusing fairy tales about negligent architects. But you and I no longer believe these fairy tales. We rely exclusively on the rigid, uncompromising laws of physics, on the laws of materials resistance, on strict demographic analysis, and on the scientifically confirmed phenomenon of dynamic soil structure interaction. These facts cannot be erased with an eraser or banned by decree. They are forever inscribed in the very internal structure of the stone tower. And the most astonishing thing is that this Italian node categorically cannot exist in proud solitude. In engineering of such transcendent level, operating with planetary tectonic masses, the concept of an isolated, single control station simply does not exist. If you design and build a pressure relief valve and seismic damper for an entire tectonic fault, you will inevitably require a whole branched network of similar devices, synchronized with each other to 1/1000th of a second. The Pisan underground complex is just one local node, one European terminal of a grandiose, branched global network that envelops our entire vast planet with an invisible web of energy and acoustic threads. This network was designed and created for total control over Earth's geological activity, for preventing global natural cataclysms, or, which sounds far more terrifying, for generating directed tectonic shifts of colossal power. If we apply advanced methods of spatial mathematical analysis and overlay the precise map of all known seismic faults onto the coordinates of similar, ancient, inexplicably complex, and massive stone structures around the world, we will immediately see a terrifyingly precise mathematical pattern. They are all located strictly at the nodes of intersection of energy and tectonic stress lines. The Pisa Tower continuously exchanges directed low-frequency acoustic vibrations with other stations hidden deep underground or disguised as other historical monuments. This most complex acoustic and gravitational dialogue has never ceased for even a second since the system was launched. Right now, while tourists take their silly photos on the green Italian lawn, somewhere in the impenetrable darkness of depths several miles down, gigantic compensatory balancers perform their measured, endless, precise movements, obeying the commands of the acoustic beam. This infrastructure is alive. It continues to function, maintaining the fragile balance of the continents. But if we finally acknowledge the existence of this network, if we realize the scale of the fact that Earth is girded by an ancient engineering infrastructure of unimaginable power, then the last, main, and most terrifying question arises before us. If the Leaning Tower of Pisa is merely one local European terminal, geniusly disguised as medieval architecture, then we are obliged to openly look into the face of the most inconvenient truth of the 21st century. We live on a planet that is literally permeated by a colossal, artificially created circulatory system of underground engineering communications. This global infrastructure network has been operating without interruption for many millennia, and it was designed by a civilization whose level of technological development made them full masters of Earth's geological processes. They harnessed the mass of continents, the kinetic energy of the planet's rotation, and the resonant frequencies of lithospheric plates to power their gigantic machines. The names of these true creators have been forever erased from official archives. Their existence is aggressively denied by professors in universities, and their grandiose achievements are cowardly attributed to illiterate peasants. But facts are stubborn things. Mathematics does not lie, and the laws of physics do not bow to political censorship. The 10-foot artificial foundation, the damping soil, the 100% dynamic soil structure interaction effect, the filigreedly curved center of gravity, and the acoustic gun from 7 bells. All this is irrefutable proof of the work of an engineering genius who thought in terms of millennia. Ponder why global political elites and academic institutions so desperately guard this secret. Why is any attempt by independent researchers to conduct deep soil scanning under Pisa Square immediately blocked by bureaucratic prohibitions? The answer is obvious. If official science admits that beneath the Italian lawn lies a high-tech seismic damper created long before the so-called Middle Ages, the entire meticulously constructed chronology of humanity will collapse in one day. It will be the absolute collapse of the entire modern system of mass control. People will have to admit that we are not the crown of evolution, not the pinnacle of progress, but merely degenerated descendants crawling over the ruins of a great engineering empire, understanding not even 1% of how these mechanisms work. Our civilization looks like a pathetic parody against the backdrop of those who knew how to stabilize continents using vibrations and 14,500-ton gravitational plumb lines. Those in power vitally need to maintain the illusion of our superiority, so that we continue to obediently believe that our modern life is the limit of all humanity's technological dreams. But now you are armed with knowledge that shatters this matrix of lies. You will never again be able to look at historical monuments with eyes clouded by propaganda. Every time they show you another ancient structure, supposedly built over 200 years with a chisel and hammer, you will see hidden engineering nodes, disguised shafts, and geodetic markers. You will inevitably see the single handiwork of the builders across the entire globe. Pisa is not a unique anomaly. It is merely one of a few mechanisms that, due to the specifics of the soil, ended up partially pushed to the surface. Hundreds of similar geodetic sonars and stabilizing stations are right now hidden deep under the foundations of modern megacities and in impassable forests. And while we argue about politics, this hidden network continues silently performing its colossal work, holding tectonic plates back from fatal rupture. We are merely temporary passengers on a ship steered by an ancient, immortal autopilot.